Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to begin the session without any further delay. We are starting a bit later than expected because of earlier delays in other sessions preceding this one, but we'd like to begin this one on as I advertised before the break, before the coffee break. And there is there's a welcoming reception that begins at 6:30 across the road from here, and so we want to have enough of a gap between the end of the session and the welcoming reception so that people can have a chance to return to their hotel rooms and freshen up before heading out. Okay, now, welcome to the last concurrent session in this room of the day on road safety. My name is Kash Ram. I'm Director General of Motor Vehicle Safety at Transport Canada, and I'm also a director on the board of directors of CCMTA, the organization which is hosting these annual meetings. I'm the moderator for today's sessions. The following three presentations will last approximately 1 hour, and because it'll be kind of difficult to keep the time and there's a lot of interest in this topic, we're not going to break between the sessions for Q's and A's. We will have a collective Q&A session with our 4 guest speakers, and so I request you to please hold your applause after each presentation. I also ask you to hold your questions until the end of the 3 presentations. A caution again to the audience, as I stated in the earlier session this afternoon, you may want to jot down any questions you have that pertain to the slides, so that you may refer to that slide if you wish to. During the questions, you may pose to individual speakers. If you have a more generic kind of question that could apply to all 4 speakers, that's fine as well. In fact, I think that would work quite well because some of these issues are rather cross-cutting. And we will likely not have time to go back to the individual PowerPoint decks and try to find the slide that you want to refer to. It's a good idea to write down what you want. The name of the session is Self-Driving Cars and Us. And I've told each of the speakers, well, we actually have 3 presentations. The first presentation is going to be a tag team of my colleagues here to my left who will do a tag team, and the other 2 are standalone presentations. And I've told them that they each have about 13 minutes each to present, following which we'll have a Q&A session. We're not as stressed or as pushed for time as we were in the earlier session, so it should be okay. The first presentation has 2 co-presenters, and I'll introduce them. Andrew Morin, to my left, is Vice President of Technical and Regulatory Affairs with the Global Automakers of Canada. Mr. Morin joined Global Automakers of Canada, or GAC, in February 2008 as Director, Technical and Regulatory Affairs, and was appointed Vice President in 2012. He works with departments, ministries, and agencies of the federal government, provinces, and other domestic and international stakeholders on critical regulatory, legislative, and policy initiatives related to vehicle safety standards, particularly on the federal level, the Motor Vehicle Safety Act and Motor Vehicle Safety Regulations, as well as with the other departments of the federal government, such as Environment Canada, vehicle greenhouse gas emissions and fuel efficiency regulations, fuel quality, chemicals management, environmental stewardship, and Spectrum Management, which is with Industry Canada. He previously served as manager, policy development with the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association, representing Chrysler, Ford, and General Motors. His co-presenter is Ms. Karen Hu, manager, environment, health, and safety with the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association. Karen Hu joined the CVMA in 2007. Her responsibilities at the association include activities on vehicle safety, environment, and energy and occupation health and safety, as well as WSIB. Karen holds a bachelor's in engineering science from the University of Toronto. So hold your applause, and we will go directly to the presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm just going to, just start to say that we really appreciate being here and giving you our perspectives collectively as the OEM manufacturers, representatives of the OEM manufacturers. So just a high-level overview. I think we're going to just give you a brief overview of who our membership is so you know who we cover. An overview of automated versus autonomous vehicles, so some terminology. A high-level overview of the type of technology that's being considered and used and what you'll see in the future, some potential implications for the deployment of the technology, and I guess when you're thinking about pilot programs, some recommendations that we've come up with, some of our thoughts on potential pilot programs. So, do you want to take over, Andrew?
Sure. Cheers. So I'll just echo Karen's thoughts and say thank you very much for having us. It's rather surreal being here while there's bathing suits and bikinis and people doing other nice stuff out there while we're all working. But and thanks to the MTO for arranging for this as well. This started mainly because we got involved in the discussions on some of the autonomous or automated vehicle regulations that the ministry was considering a few months back. So at any rate, just a very quick message about who we both who I used to work for and who Karen still works for, and my own association. So Global Automakers of Canada represents the 14 of the 18 mainline car makers in this country. We sell approximately 55% of the cars in the Canadian market. 11 of our 14 manufacturers, including 2 of our affiliated companies, Honda and Toyota, make vehicles in the NAFTA region, Honda and Toyota having 3 plants between them in Ontario. Karen's folks, of course, have 3 longtime manufacturers in Ontario, GM, Ford, and Chrysler, and represent the other half of the market, ebbing and flowing, depending on how pickup trucks are doing from day to day. But at any rate, interesting to point out too, we used to represent Suzuki Canada as well. Suzuki has withdrawn from the Canadian market, as you may have heard earlier this year, as they have in the US. I'll carry on with this part. Okay. I think one of the things we'd like to talk about from the OEM perspective is the need to get the terminology right. And this is, again, is our view. I know there was other views stated, and Barrie might have some that differ or complement our own, but we're really keen on nailing down the use of the word automated vehicles to represent AVs as opposed to autonomous vehicles. So our members, and generally the broader automotive engineering community, including the members of SAE, for example, we typically have shied away from using that term autonomous because it's just too encompassing a term. So we prefer, it focuses mostly on self-driving, and we're not making self-driving cars quite yet, although some of them are darn near capable. Using the terms autonomous and self-driving, I think, incorrectly applies that the automation system is capable of independently managing that vehicle from start to finish. And also, it in our view, will change the way change the rules by which the vehicle operate and turn the standards, and CASHRAM is my federal regulator, our regulator, and until that time comes, until they start promulgating standards, specifically on technology, we hopefully will see the use of the term automated. Just to let you know, of course, and I'm not sure if this was mentioned earlier, I wasn't at the previous presentation, so forgive me, but SAE published with the OEM's assistance in the past year or so. A lot of work has gone into identifying 6 levels of automation. Level 0, of course, being no automation, all the way up to level 5, which is full automation and essentially an autonomous vehicle at that point, or self-driving. Important to note that in our view, so, levels 0 and 2 are already in production, and they're already basically on the road in many forms in terms of collision avoidance technologies, various advanced driver assistance systems, etc. Level 1 and 2, in the opinion of the automakers, will only automate a portion of the dynamic driving task. So it still requires the driver to perform the remainder of the duties and be engaged in the use of the vehicle. Levels 3 to 5, on the other hand, if you look at them as automated driving systems, are capable of performing a complete driving task under some or all conditions. And those all conditions might include other infrastructure, as we've discussed earlier. This is just a slide. I won't take you through it in the interest of time, but this is pulled right from the SAE document. We'd be happy to provide our presentation to everybody so they can have this reference point. Very important, I think, for provincial regulators as well to be aware of these levels. And if you can, I think we'd all, to get on the same page and have a base level of understanding, appreciate that in making regulations down the road, if these terms and these levels were identified, it would be much easier for everyone. Karen.
Okay, so I'm just going to go over these quite quickly. So when you look at the type of technologies being used in automated vehicles, there's kind of two big groups. So there's sensors-based, which is kind of all onboard vehicle sensor-based technology. So it doesn't take any external data. It's all using data that the vehicle is collecting. So it uses a sense, plan, act design to interpret data and to make plans about the vehicle's next option. So there's a few examples of the type of sensor systems you might have. In terms of the limitations, I guess a big one is cost. It's very expensive to put this technology in, and there's some challenges with mapping and being able to predict things like a human. So that's not available yet. The other broad type of technology being considered is connectivity-based. So this is vehicles talking to other vehicles, or other infrastructure, or other pieces. So that uses, there's a number of different ways you can do this. Dedicated short-range communications is one technology that we're looking at, and it's important because it facilitates the safety type of benefits from vehicle to vehicle and vehicle to infrastructure because it's very quick. You can also look at things like commercial wireless, LTE, Bluetooth, Wi-Fi. In terms of limitations, there's still a lot of unresolved issues in terms of spectrum, securing those frequencies for vehicle-to-vehicle use, vehicle-to-infrastructure use, especially in safety situations. It's very important that there aren't other signals interfering. So that's something that we're still working on. It also requires infrastructure investment. I know we talked about this at the previous session, which is, again, very costly. And it also requires very high market penetration. If there's one vehicle on the road, if it doesn't have anyone to talk to, you don't see any benefits, right? So you need kind of mass market adoption. And just as a side note, NHTSA recently has signaled that it intends to require DSRC in vehicles in the future, so more to come on that. In terms of, I guess, realistically, what we will see in vehicles is probably some sort of combination of the two technologies. So it basically takes the benefits of both of the systems and puts them together. Again, there are still implementation challenges in terms of mapping the human-machine interface, how the person works into it. Standardization is a big question. I think we heard that there's a lot of work going on. And a big piece is data security and privacy protection. So there's going to be a lot of data generated. How do you make sure it's not hacked, and how do you make sure that it stays secure? Deployment and potential implications. So I guess, why are we looking at these technologies? There was a US report that estimated that there could be a potential annual savings of $1.3 trillion a year, with global savings of more than 4.6. We don't have any Canadian data at this point, but the savings are substantial. There'd be a huge potential effect on crashes through the automation. Potential implications for traffic congestion and associated costs of being in traffic. Potential effect on energy emissions and reducing GHGs if you're more efficient. It could change land use if your vehicles are automated in terms of where people want to live and what type of structures you have. Mobility for those who aren't able to drive, and just overall decrease in costs. So to realize these benefits, there's been a lot of work being done globally in different countries. I think an example that was raised earlier today is a safety pilot in the US. So it's a live on the road in Ann Arbor. They deployed 2,000 vehicles with different types of technologies, vehicle to vehicle, vehicle to infrastructure, and I think they found that they're seeing a lot of interactions between these vehicles, and there's a lot of data, I think, that they're going through. So there is a US website that we've linked to there that has some of the information that's really interesting. There's also things you have to think about, like, liability. What is this going to mean? Because you're changing kind of the paradigm of how vehicles work. And there's implications to other sectors too, like insurance, which Robert will talk to you about. I'm not going to get into that. So you can see there's a lot of potential implications and benefits and considerations, I guess, going forward. So on that point, we know this is an emerging issue, and the various levels of government, municipalities, provinces are thinking about this because it's becoming a reality. You're getting some of these tax vehicles on the roads. So collectively as a sector, we've kind of thought about what we think would be useful when you're thinking about these pilots. Generally, I think it's still too early to put in regulatory structures. For both automated vehicles and connected vehicles, new regulations really aren't needed at this time. There are pieces of legislation in place in terms of overall highway traffic safety. As Andrew mentioned before, consistent definitions and terminology is very important. There's already advanced driver assist systems on the road right now. We've been progressing very quickly, individually and collaboratively with a lot of programs. So I guess we just put it out there. If you have any questions or you're thinking of moving towards any pilots, come and talk to us. We're very open to hearing and assisting where we can, and bouncing ideas or whatever. Do you want to do the last couple? Yeah.
I feel like we're going at a break, very high pace here.
Sorry.
No. It's tough. Cash said 13 minutes, and I don't dare cross my regulator. So, I think the key message we want to leave everybody collectively with today is really point number 6 to some extent. Those of you that represent provinces that are considering getting into the regulation game, we know that Ontario often leads the way, and I think Ontario over the next few summer months is going to launch, depending what happens, election and otherwise, will probably carry on with some form of more formal consultation with our industry, et cetera, and we very much look forward to that. We hope that whatever comes out of that could form a pattern, if you will, for what happens in the rest of the country. What we don't like as OEMs is a patchwork of regulations. I repeat, we do not like patchworks of regulations. So whether you're going to regulate incorrectly or correctly, it's important that it be consistent. Because what we can't have is a situation where, and of course vehicles are certified at the federal level by Cash and his folks. What we can have is a situation where vehicles cannot be deployed, say in British Columbia, but can be deployed in Ontario and vice versa. So CCMTA, we think, has a very critical role in bringing all the provinces together, and that should there be a reasonable basis to explore regulation in the near future, we think CCMTA could perhaps strike a committee, could coordinate that activity as working with all the provinces in the country and the territories as well. We do hope that you consult with the OEMs. We are not the end-all, be-all of the automated issue, but certainly we have a very different interest in that we are making the actual vehicles as opposed to making just the applications or pieces of the puzzle that fit in. At the end of the day, our vehicles, as I say, are certified at the federal level, and we don't want to see a situation where we have to cross additional hurdles at a provincial or sub-national level. Pre-consultation or pre-publication of any regulations is very important, and we've seen this with distracted driving regulations and legislation across the country. Generally, that process has gone quite smoothly. There's been some hiccups here and there, but in general, there's been lots of good consultation both with the aftermarket sector and with the OEM sector in advance of actually promulgating the regulation. The important thing for us is that we are a very tough industry to swing around in a short turn. We work on design cycles of 5 to 10 years, and that's very important. Production run of a vehicle, whether it's made domestically or in the US or internationally for that matter, typically will last for 4 to 10 years with a refresh at the 4 or 5 year mark. So we're not very nimble as an industry, given the cycle time of our product and the design time as well, to simply change on the fly, add new technology that may be required or may not be required. So it's tough to think about. It's a little easier when you're making iPads and you can introduce the next version of a technology in the new application. Not so difficult, not so easy with cars. We also would hope that to some extent that the regulations that are promulgated in Canada and the provinces or at the federal level are worked on in accordance with what's happening in the United States. That's not to say that any of the 3 or 4 pilot programs that have been announced there are the perfect solution in the Canadian OEM's eyes, but certainly it would help if there were some coordination across the 2 jurisdictions. We do have something in Canada called the Regulatory Cooperation Council, which entails the aligning of regulations with the U.S. We don't like straight-out harmonization among my membership for several reasons. We think that Canada should always take a good hard look at what we're adopting. But in general, yes, it's fair to say that the OEMs in this country would, by and large, align with U.S. regulations. That also gives us the opportunity to spread costs over products and deliver the same technology in various jurisdictions. So, just the final point, we strongly recommend that, if CCMTA can, I don't want to create more bureaucracy, but if there's the possibility to establish a committee or to oversee this sort of activity among the provinces, that would probably be helpful. And I see folks at the back looking at each other saying, no, not me. But we would be happy to consult with you in that regard. So I'll leave it there. And sorry for the rush, but Karen, do you have anything else to add? No, I'm good. Perfect. Cash.
14 minutes, 15 seconds. Okay, that's okay. Okay. Our second presentation will be delivered by Mr. Robert Tremblay. He's Director of Research with the Insurance Bureau of Canada. With a background in research, government, and public affairs, Robert worked as an associate researcher at the Université de Moncton, Canadian Institute for Research on Economic Development, as General Manager for the Northwest Industrial Commission in New Brunswick and Director of Government and Public Affairs for Mediacom in Quebec. Upon joining IBC in 1997, Robert developed and led a number of road safety initiatives. He was promoted to his current role in 2009. As Director of Research, Robert is responsible for the execution of research activities, including public opinion, market research, and major academic research projects and policy development of IBC severe weather adaptation initiatives. He is leading the development of the municipal risk assessment tool at this current time. And in the interest of time, and I will be concluding by saying that Mr. Tremblay holds an undergraduate and master's degrees from the Université de Moncton. So over to Robert, and yes, his presentation is loaded, so
Yeah, thank you.
ready to go.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. What am I saying? Good afternoon. My mind was still with the Blue Jays. Incidentally, they won 6 in a row, so I would say that we are ready for the World Series. The topic today is going to be automated vehicle, the potential insurance implications. Obviously, this is perhaps a little bit theoretical, but I believe that, as we know, is this on the arrow? All right. The fact is that the technology is on the verge of maturity, and of course, this is an early Star Trek image. And of course, technology is moving very fast. And when we think about the evolution of technology, it usually moves much faster than the ability to actually regulate it or service it. If we are looking at the introduction of the combustion engine compared to the horse-drawn carriage, the changeover was not being done automatically. There has been a number of years where both technology were coexisting. And I suspect that that's what we're going to see with this. But before I talk a little bit more about the implication of this potential technology, autonomous vehicle technology on insurance industry, I think it's important to do a little bit of Insurance 101, and I promise you it's not going to be painful. In terms of insurance, we have personal insurance. That's what we call for automobile and residential. That's what we call the personal lines. We also have commercial insurance, which usually is not standard. And we are we're covering their commercial vehicle fleets and businesses, machinery, technology, etc. All that primary insurance level is actually backed by a series of reinsurers, and those are the global insurance companies to the insurance companies, which makes it a very sturdy system worldwide. The insurance industry can sustain without a flinch a loss of about $175 billion any year. So it's a very sturdy system, but it's a system that is based on transfer of risk. And of course, you have also to look at other, the reinsurance, of course, is for a global risk transfer for personal and commercial lines. And you have on top of that other types of insurance like the surety bonds, which are there to make sure that things are performing the way they are. It's very common for the construction industry, but it can also be applied to the technology industry. So that's, in a nutshell, the types of insurance products that are available. Now, in terms of the players, you have self-insurance. Many large businesses actually carry a pretty high level of self-insurance. They're not going to buy an insurance policy from a company. They will say, okay, we can withstand a $500 or $600 million hit. We're going to take that beyond that $500 or $600 million. What we're going to do is we're going to go and see the reinsurers directly, and we're going to cede those risks that are less probable, but that has a huge impact so that they meet their requirements. And of course, governments are self-insured for the most part. Sometimes government utilities will carry excess reinsurance as well. The primary insurers, the people from whom you buy your insurance policy, are all national in scope. The reinsurers, as I mentioned earlier, are global, and they can operate in many countries. We do have in Canada, however, the regulatory obligation that some of the reinsurance has to be in Canada reinsurance. That is, that the reinsurance company have to have capital that are linked to the Canadian market. So that's very quickly Insurance 101. Now you know a lot about insurance, and we're ready to move to the next section. This is the other part, and this requires a bit of effort. You have first-party insurance, you have third-party insurance, and you have no-fault system. So those are all, of course, elements that are very important to understand when we look forward on autonomous vehicle, what impact will it have on the insurance? So the first party is when you drive your vehicle and you ran into a wall. That means that you're responsible for your own crash, and therefore it's your own first-party insurance that covers that, the damage to the vehicle, and any bodily injury that you might sustain from that. The third-party insurance, with the exception of no-fault system, but then again, there's a lot of variance there, and I'm just giving you the very, very simple one. The third party is if you're driving a vehicle and you're responsible to damage other vehicles, other property, or you injure someone, because you are responsible for that collision, you are bound to pay for those damages. That's why you buy insurance. So third-party liability is a very important concept. And in the no-fault systems that we have, with more or less purity, you have each party is responsible for their own damage, regardless of the responsibility. And you cannot sue for punitive damage beyond the compensation scale, which is usually set by regulation. All right. Now, is it business as usual for insurers when we move towards automated technology, vehicle technology? We're still speculating at this stage, and the Insurance Bureau of Canada does not have at the present time any given position on that topic. So what we have to go by today is to have an informed discussion based on insurance principles. Now, what we believe, however, is that the impact is going to be felt differently depending upon at what stage of technology implementation are we at. Even though the technology is moving very fast, the acceptance of the technology and the speed at which it's going to be dealt with will vary. We don't know what that is going to be. I don't have a crystal ball, and quite frankly, I would be bad at it even if I tried. But we have a look at three phases: development, introduction, and maturity of that technology. And at each of those stages, you have insurance implications, and that's what I'm going to be discussing. Now, one of the very, very important elements is what we call the liability chain. As we mentioned earlier, a party can be held liable if that party's conduct or product causes harm to another party. Now, this is very important to understand because the liability right now in automobile insurance is based on you, the human being, controlling the vehicle, and by your action or lack of actions, you are harming someone else. What does happen once that vehicle is no longer into your control and care? So your own liability is not necessarily at stake here. So it's the liability chain. So where will the liability go? And in theory, it could be either to the vehicle manufacturer, the software manufacturer, the equipment manufacturer, depending upon where the failure, systemic failure, happened. So that certainly is a very important concept that needs to be borne in mind. So who is responsible? As I said, but once again, at level 4 and certainly at level 5 autonomy, based on the scale that we just saw a few minutes ago, the driver is no longer the driver. So who is going to be responsible at that point is something that will need to be determined. Now, in terms of the development stages, which is where we are today, level 4 and level 5 is not merely an enhancement to existing technologies. We are going to let the control of the vehicle to an automated system that is going to be governed by some form of algorithm that will be backed by a series of sensors. The driver is no longer the driver. So if we have to blame someone for a crash, theoretically, it cannot be the driver. Now, who will it be? I think it will require a very, very good set of people with technical skills to figure out what went wrong. And that, of course, is an implication that is important. So at this stage right now, we are essentially testing the technology. And from the current legislative framework, if a vehicle is licensed, the insurance industry is going to insure it. Now, what premium is going to be charged is a different story, but under the current framework, if the DMV authorizes a driverless vehicle to be on the road, we will insure it. We have absolutely no choice whatsoever on that matter. Now, of course, do you need to do more? As you're testing those technologies, do you need to put more than the, I don't know, depending upon which jurisdiction, $250,000 liability coverage? I mean, that's kind of ridiculous. The technology itself is far more valuable than that, and the potential damage that it could cause to others is obviously higher. Now, will you allow a large company to use their self-insurance limits? Or how will you have them to post bonds? Those are all elements here that need to be looked at. And once again, we don't have any position on that. We're just looking at what could be. And there will be a need, of course. You know, we're insurers. So if anything can be insured, we are there to provide that insurance. We are a risk transfer mechanism. That's what our industry does. And therefore, there will be players in the insurance industry that will be there to help the software developer, the technology developer, to have the liability insurance that they need. Now, it's not a big problem when you're dealing with 20 or 10 or 15 vehicles. The liability limits are pretty reasonable to find. What happened when you have 2,000? What happened when you have 20,000? What happened when you have 50,000? So those are all interesting elements. And of course, that will usually insurance is based on claims history. Well, there's no claim history with automated vehicles. So we're going to have to look and cooperate with the manufacturers and the developers of technology for us to understand that technology in the first place and try to figure out how much should we charge for that coverage. Once you are into the introduction, you've done your technology test, and then you're starting to put in the road those vehicles. As I said, it starts with 5, 20, 50, 200,000. Well, there's 9 million vehicles in Ontario alone. So even if you were to put 250 or 1 million of those, you would still have to deal with interaction between the human-driven vehicles and the driverless vehicles. So in terms of the insurance industry's business, we're still doing well. Don't worry about us. We are doing fine. We are going to continue to provide the coverage, and the risk might materially change over time. We don't know, but we will certainly have a look at that. One thing for sure is as the technology is being moved forward, we will need to have some kind of data to figure out how much should we charge for the insurance. Now, there's a little bit more than that. Once we move to the maturity phase, with time, as I mentioned here, we can expect physical damage to the vehicle, theft, vandalism, to continue. However, bodily injury, if everything moves according to the plan, should be a rather remote situation. So you can expect that the cost of bodily injury coverage will be going down because it's always based on claims history. So that certainly is a good news for everybody. Now, one thing that is going to be very critical is the business model. Right now, you own your vehicle. What's to say that when we move into the autonomous vehicle scenario, you're not going to longer own it. You will be taking your smartphone or whatever is going to take the form of a smartphone at that point and order one to be in 5 minutes at your doorstep. And at that point in time, you put your kids in it and they go to the soccer game. You'll join them a little bit later, but you have a few other things to do. So at that point in time, you're no longer the owner of your vehicle. There's still a risk. It needs to be covered. Will that be the transportation provider that will be assuming that risk, and then the manufacturers, and then that will just be transferred to you as part of your rental fee or usage fee? Those are all questions that I'm hoping that I'm not going to have to deal with because I'm going to be retired at that point. But those are important questions that need to be looked at. So the business model for the delivery of this technology to people is going to have a huge impact on how insurance is going to be provided. At the end of the day, everybody will need insurance. It's just where is it going to be on the liability chain that we don't know, and how much will it actually cost, because it will be based on the claims history and the loss ratios. So, but of course, like with new technology, there's no risks. We alluded a little bit when we talked in the previous session, hacking, data breaches, inappropriate response to a routine causing a crash, and the whole issue of coexistence of technology. So, as I said, there are a lot of questions, not necessarily a whole lot of answers. What I can tell you is that this new technology will obviously bring challenges. As a society, we're going to have to determine if the benefits outweighs the risk, and quite frankly, I believe it is. And it will require a lot of cooperation. And once again, and I alluded to that in my presentation, the insurance industry is highly adaptable. We started, 500-600 years ago, insuring ships, and look at where we are today. So risk transfer mechanism, which is what insurance is, there will always be a need for it. The question is, where will it be in the liability chain, and what will be the price depending upon the loss ratio. So that's, in a nutshell, what I wanted to say. And you can expect insurers to support the car or the transportation pod owners and businesses to meet their insurance needs of the future. We'll be there. So that's all I had for now. I think I'm within my time limit.
Slightly over.
Oh, slightly over. Sorry.
No penalties. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Yeah, and you see questions for later.
So we will move forthwith to the third presentation by our fourth speaker of the afternoon. Barrie Kirk is Executive Director of the Canadian Automated Vehicles Centre for Excellence, CAVCO, and Barrie is the Chair of ITS Canada's Autonomous Vehicles Task Force. Barrie has worked in the technology industries in Canada, the United Kingdom, and the U.S., including senior management positions at Ottawa area companies. He has been a consultant since 1982, specializing in the management and engineering aspects of information and communication technologies, especially ITS, transportation, telematics, telecommunications, satellite communications, etc. His projects over the last few years have focused on autonomous vehicles, connected vehicles, automotive infotainment, traveler information services, real-time traffic information, and vehicle use surveys. Barrie received a BSc in electrical engineering from Coventry University in the UK. He's a professional engineer licensed by Professional Engineers Ontario. So without any further delay, over to Barrie. And he's got a towel.
Yes. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Tash. Today is May the 25th, and that is Towel Day, celebrated around the world. There's a few puzzled faces there. Towel Day was started in memory of Douglas Adams, who wrote The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And it's both a comedy and a science fiction. And in that book, Douglas Adams wrote that a towel is the most massively useful thing that you can take with you if you go hitchhiking around the galaxy. And his fans, it's a bit of a cult, his fans wear a towel on May the 25th in his memory. So, now, once upon a time, the whole idea of hitching a ride on a spaceship around the galaxy and the idea of computers driving your car were both science fiction. Today, of course, the first is still science fiction, but the second is coming upon us very, very quickly, and that's what I want to talk about. I would also go back to my title slide, and in response to what Andrew and Karen were saying, want to point out that the second word in CAVCO is automated and not autonomous. So we're on the same page. And I'd also note that Robert also had Captain Kirk in his early slides, so another spaceship metaphor. Okay, I want to talk about this. In the last couple of hours, you've heard a lot of things about self-driving cars, automated vehicles, whatever you call them. I'm going to skip some of the slides which repeat what you've heard earlier. I want to really focus on the stuff that would be a bit new to you. And we know that Google's cars, they've now, in the fleet, has done over 1 million kilometers of driving. And one thing which hasn't been mentioned while I've been here anyway is the fact that Ontario especially is doing a lot of good leadership things, a couple of things. MTO, and this is public, the MTO is developing regulations to allow testing of AVs on public roads in Ontario. That's an ongoing, it's a work in progress. Also, there's a very good research program for connected vehicles and autonomous vehicles that's been announced jointly by MTO, the Ontario's Centre of Excellence, and the Ministry of Research and Innovation, and that's wonderful news. If we look further ahead, there's some interesting things happening. This is a fully automated taxi. It'll carry 2 people. The first ones will be delivered in England by the end of this year. There will be a trial in Milton Keynes, England, starting in 2015. And you summon one of these with your smartphone. You pay £2 flat rate for a trip anywhere, and you just tell it where you want to go, and it will take you. It is a fully self-driving. This is low speed, maximum speed about 20K, but this technology is coming a lot faster than most people realize. We have proposed to the city of Ottawa that Ottawa does the same thing. The backdrop here is the artist's impression of the new Lansdowne Park, which will be a pedestrian-friendly urban village with a sports center and both apartments and a commercial area. And we proposed that they have the same sort of trial there as will be in Milton Keynes, and our discussions, that's still an ongoing process. The City of Ottawa hasn't said yes. I don't want to put any words in their mouth, but we've made the proposal. Timing, my guess is we'll see the very, very first fully autonomous cars maybe in 3 or 4 years. Initially, the take-up will be slow, but the real take-up will be in the 2020s. Between 2020 and 2030 is when we'll see a large increase in the penetration, both in this country and around the world. Robert was talking about transportation as a service. Interestingly, the early adopters will be the young people and senior citizens and the handicapped. People in the Middle Ages will be less interested. And daughter of a friend of mine said that she really doesn't like driving because it distracts her from her texting. This is something that's on the drawing board, a company in Australia called Zoox. You can see the name here. they have a concept which is still being developed for a fully automated level 5, in Robert's terms, car, which will never ever be driven by a human. And if you do that, you don't need a steering wheel, you don't need pedals, you don't need rear view mirrors. On this concept, there's no windshield. This is just metal, it's a panel, plastic maybe. Now, obviously, humans might like to have a windshield so they can see out, but the car doesn't need it. This will be bidirectional. It can go either way equally well. And the front seats can, in fact, swivel around. So you have 4 people who actually face and talk to each other, have a meal together, play cards, whatever. And this kind of concept, we won't see it for at least 10 years. But clearly, there's going to be a lot of work needed by Transport Canada to make that sort of thing street legal in this country. Interestingly, this is also being designed to be manufactured with 3D printing. Each quadrant is essentially the same, except they're mirror images of each other. And they sort of build 4 different quadrants, identical except for being a mirror image. And then they just assemble it. A very, very different concept to what we've seen so far. Google had a very good presentation at the Florida AV Summit in November, and they want to keep expectations reasonable. The technology, they say, will be deployed incrementally. It will not be 100% effective. There will be crashes. One of the things that really bugs me is Volvo. They're a wonderful company. They make very safe cars. But when Volvo talks about a crash-proof car, I shudder, because there's no such thing. All hardware, all software fails occasionally. And so Google is trying to lower the bar a little bit so people don't have overly large expectations. From day one of AVs, the technology will be better, it'll be safer than humans, and it'll continue to get better from there. Karen mentioned Morgan Stanley. Let me come back to this. The AV impacts, we talked about this very briefly earlier, it's going to affect everything in both the public sector and the private sector. I'm not exaggerating when I say it'll have as big an impact on our economy, on our society, as the first cars did over 100 years ago. It'll be huge. And we're still coming to grips and getting our arms around that. Last year, I had the honor to organize and chair a summit of AVs organized by ITS Canada, held in November. And the plan was to take the first steps in helping Canada get ready for AVs. We had people from all levels of government, from various other government agencies, the police and so on, the RCMP, industry associations, universities. Transport Canada very kindly provided the conference room we met in, and that was very, very helpful. We've got a lot of conclusions from that, and not everybody agrees with everything, but I'm going to step through some of these. The second bullet, the technology is moving fast, and there's a real risk here that it'll arrive before we as a society are ready to use it. And there will be problems. Think about it the first time an AV hits a child and maybe kills that child. All hell will break loose, and that will happen at some stage, unfortunately. Let's keep moving here. Conscious about the time. One of the things which occupied us at the summit is leadership. As you folks know, a lot of the transportation issues are a provincial responsibility. There's Transport Canada. What we really need in this area is some national leadership, not federal, not provincial, but national. And there's no one institution that can guide us in all of that. And it's something that's lacking, and there's no easy answer. Second bullet, This is going to change our cities, and we can't just leave it to the free market and the developers. We've got a chance, an opportunity here to shape the way our cities in the future will look, and it means being proactive and not just leaving it to the developers. In terms of government actions, some government departments are engaged. Transport Canada, as I mentioned, were very supportive of the ITS Canada Summit. They're very actively following what's happening in the world. I mentioned MTO a few minutes ago. But in terms of government, I would urge all levels of government who are not engaged to get more engaged. I'd love to see senior politicians get involved. I look at the US, the White House is engaged. I look at the President of France, who has said that AV technology is an important part of France's economy. The Prime Minister of Japan has actually ridden in 2 different AVs by 2 different manufacturers. I'd love to see both federal and provincial senior politicians take the same very public stand and advocate for this. We need an overall deployment roadmap. One of the misconceptions about AVs is infrastructure. The first commandment of AVs is thou shalt have no special infrastructure. Because if we did, the cost to deploy special infrastructure on every road, urban and rural, across the country is huge and impossible. However, there are ways to fine-tune the infrastructure for AVs. A couple of examples. One is roundabouts. Studies that have done show that roundabouts are far more efficient for AVs than traffic signals. Second, if you do want traffic signals, the timing can be optimized for AVs rather than humans. Missed that one. I think there's a big need as well within government at all levels to address the full range of non-transportation issues, and that's some of them. Healthcare, for example, employment. There will be job losses and job gains. And I could spend many minutes on each one of those. The bottom line is that AVs will be here a lot sooner than people expect. They're going to change almost everything. At the AV Summit, one of the participants there said towards the end of the afternoon that she realized that AVs will have an impact on virtually every department, on every level of government in the country. Now, some government departments are engaged, others are not, and I would urge those that are not to get engaged. And the bottom line is a lot of work needs to be done. Cash, how did I do for time?
You're right on schedule.
Can I have 30 seconds?
30 seconds?
30 seconds.
Go ahead.
Okay.
30 seconds.
I want to, looking out at you, you are the kind of people, I think, who once in a while wonder about the meaning of life. And most people do. I found the answer. And I want to share the answer with you about the meaning of life. And the easy way to find out is to Google it. If you go to Google and you type in, as I did at the top there, the answer to life, the universe, and everything. If you then press enter, Google tells you the answer to the meaning of life. Wait for it. 42. And that profound answer comes straight out of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And to understand that, you'll have to read the book or watch the movie, and take me full circle, so it's a good place to stop.
Thank you. Now we can applaud our speakers. And I'll open the floor up for questions to any or all of the speakers. So please go to the microphone in the middle of the floor and identify yourself and ask your question.
Me again. Susan Spencer, and thank you very much for your presentations. I found them all very, very informative, and the enthusiasm that you have for your subject matter is really quite engaging and contagious, I say. Robert, for you, I just wonder if I would, in an accident situation, it would be okay if I said, my car made me do it. But for the rest of the panel, I guess what I heard is a bit mixed messaging, I think, from our two first speakers who said, regulation may not be necessary right now. And then we heard a message from Barrie who says a lot of work needs to be done. Could we maybe ask you to debate amongst yourself about that particular point? Because, as a former government employee, I can say the world of government moves very, very slowly. And what you're talking about is something that's moving very fast. So I think if we could set the stage that way.
So I think it's just important. I think what we're stressing as OEMs is that motor vehicle safety standards are promulgated at the federal level and at the federal level only, and nobody in this room should be going off and changing that course. There may be an opportunity, there may be a requirement down the road, and I'm saying very down the road, like a decade or more out, for an organization like Transport Canada to regulate advanced driver systems. Right now, we don't see that need. You to some extent do already with electronic stability control as a small example. What we're saying, though, is that we as OEMs, as the mainline automakers, not the Zoom guys that you saw on the slide here, and I'll address that later, but setting that aside, there are no federal regulations, nor do we believe provincial regulations, that keep autonomous vehicles or automated vehicles, as we're choosing to call them, off the road at this time. So a Mercedes S-Class is essentially an automated vehicle right now. It's not level 3 or 5, but it's there. Infiniti has one. Several other automakers, including GM, have them as well. So there's nothing in the federal CMVSS that are keeping those vehicles from the road. And other than the attendant issues to do with perhaps insurance, which is not my bailiwick nor Karen's, or to deal with the personal liability issues, and any Highway Traffic Act specific conditions, i.e. there must be an individual behind the wheel and care and control of the vehicle at all times, that language. Other than that, we don't see any regulations currently precluding these vehicles to be on the road. So this is why I have some trouble, if you will, and I'm going to say this very gently, with folks saying, get out there and do the work. I don't disagree that work needs to be done on infrastructure and all the attendant systems. But as far as the cars go, there's not one damn regulation in this country to keep me and my Mercedes S-Class fully automated off the road right now. That's the fact of the matter.
Okay, other perspectives? Please use the mic.
Well, Andrew, I disagree and I agree. I mean, in terms of the Mercedes S-Class and the similar cars, I agree with you. That's street legal in both provincially, federally. But I'm looking a bit further ahead. I'm looking to cars that are fully automated, which are coming fairly soon, which will require a new generation of regulations, both provincially and federally. I mean, the idea of having a car that you can, as somebody said earlier today, put your kids in, send them off to soccer practice without any adults in them. That's not permissible under the present regulations. That'll be possible in a few short years. We need to be thinking about that. And I showed the Zoot car, and that, again, would not be street legal in Canada, and it's the sort of thing that is coming. The two-seater electric pods, that is not designed for road use, but the fact that it's available for pedestrian-friendly areas shows the state of the technology, and it's not too long before that kind of vehicle will be available on road use as well. And these changes in the regulations do take time. I realize that, and it's far better to start sooner rather than later. So when the technology is here, the whole regulatory and insurance environment is here as well.
Sorry, if I could just add a thing. I think I agree. I think we all agree that the work needs to be done and we need to anticipate this sort of stuff, but you also have to be careful. The technology is still developing, it's not there yet. We haven't necessarily landed on what it's going to be, so you just need to be careful that if you are thinking about regulations, developing regulations, that you don't create any barriers at this point, again, because it's still early, right? So that's kind of, I guess, the balance that we need to strike.
Can I just add just one last point about the fantasy angle is the Jetsons, the Zoox cars, et cetera. I agree, it's all neat stuff. I used to work in the technology sector. Whether those cars are automated, autonomous, whether they're gas, diesel, electric, running on corn oil, it doesn't matter. It's still a vehicle. It has to be certified under CMVSS. And none of those vehicles, just like low-speed vehicles, we went through this issue in the provinces several years ago, will not meet frontal, side, or other safety standards. Until you can meet the federally mandated safety standards, you can't put the vehicle on the road. So I don't know about you, but I don't want to sound like a big bad lobbyist from the auto sector, but I don't want to be driving that pod around Ottawa, even at 20 kilometers an hour, if somebody in a Ford F-150 is driving beside me or at me, or even a small Honda Civic. So you have to think about these issues as well. If we create another separate class of vehicles for, say, low-speed vehicles, as was discussed several years ago, and BC dealt with it as well, then, okay, we can parse that discussion out into a separate class. But frankly, whether the vehicle is automated, autonomous, or otherwise, unless it can meet those vehicle safety standards and withstand the trauma that current vehicles are built to withstand, and we're spending tons of money and lots of research dollars. And by the way, a big drag on fuel efficiency is all the safety technology which we are required by law to put in these vehicles. So I don't want to say we're reluctant to put safety technology in vehicles, but when CASH changes a safety standard at the federal level, typically it adds weight to the vehicle. So just something to bear in mind. But we do not, as an industry, as a mainline OEM, a group of OEMs, support putting so-called plastic vehicles and on the road at this time. I mean, that's not to say we don't want to do it. They can't meet the standard. So just something to think about.
Actually, Andrew, you took my point. The issue of occupant protection will remain as long as you have both technologies operating in the same environment. So that's really one of them. The other thing too, as well as we're looking into the gradation, from 0 to 5. One of the things that, as I was looking at this issue, of course, I don't claim to be an expert, I'm not. But one thing that scared me was the level 4, which is where the vehicle can be fully autonomous under certain circumstances, but the human has to be ready to regain control. We have seen from the airline industry that fully automation of flights, the flight between Rio and Paris a few years back when it crashed, the reason behind the crash was that the pilots were joking and talking and had all of a sudden to go from a state of rest to a state of emergency, and as they were reacting, they of course made a mistake that led to the crash. Well, you can imagine the same kind of situation on a road that is being occupied by both technology and non-technology controlled vehicle. It's a recipe for disaster. So as we're looking forward, and like everyone here in this room, I believe that there's huge social benefits, but there will need to be a roadmap, and we will need to do it in an orderly fashion. Otherwise, we won't ensure.
One other postscript to that. Robert, I've got a slightly different spin on that Air France crash, which is relevant to AVs. The reason that I understood for the Air France crash is that nowadays pilots spend a lot more time being trained to program the computers than actually flying the plane. And when the plane got into trouble, they first of all didn't recognize that the fact that the plane was in a stall, and second, they didn't know how to get out of it, and they reacted the wrong way. Now, long time ago, in the 70s, I learned to fly. And you go through a stall and how to get into it and how to get out of it, but those pilots couldn't do that. And that's why it crashed. And the same does relate to AVs. If you've got cars where the driver is not engaged in the road around him or around her, and then suddenly has to take over, then that becomes dangerous. It takes a while to get up to speed and to figure out what the situation is and what to do about it. And that is dangerous. And in fact, my colleague Paul Godsmart often bends my ear to say that the thing that scares him most is a mixed environment of human-driven and AV-driven cars. And he would like to see us go directly to a fully automated environment as quickly as possible. That's easier said than done, but in an ideal world, that would be the safest thing.
Very good comment. One more question?
Hi, Paul Harbottle, Ontario Minister of Transportation. Thanks for being here. Thanks for the good presentation discussion. As a government regulator, I'm just wondering, so we've had two presentations today and a number of different perspectives. If you as key stakeholders, we'll just lump you into as key stakeholders, if you have one request or one priority of government, and what would that be? And would you be on the same page on that?
I think, yeah, I think the main priority, and Karen, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the big deal we can have from you as a group of administrators is consistency across the provinces. So I jokingly said before, whether it's correct or incorrect, please make it consistent. We can deal with it in the same fashion. And whether that leadership, I agree with that concept of national leadership as opposed to federal, cash ram, directorate leadership, or Ontario taking the lead, but this is all going to come as a confluence of sort of efforts here, and not to leave out the insurance agency, because I know we haven't had a lot of those discussions in Canada yet. But I think consistency across and some sort of national approach would be, an aligned approach to the provinces would be what we look for the most. And consultation with the industry, that's all we ask.
Well, Andrew, you took the words out of my mouth here. I mean, my first would have been that national leadership I spoke about earlier, and I agree with you. You said an overall plan, and I agree with that. And those two things, I think, would do a lot of wonderful things to get us moving more quickly. So as soon as you said those two, I'll pick my third one, and that is for the senior politicians, federally and provincially, to get a lot more engaged and a lot more visible in supporting AVs.
Are you sure you want that, though?
Oh, I have nothing to add.
We'll have one more question.
Numbed you to sleep.
I think it was a very interesting session. I'd like to, again, let's applaud our presenters. I have a couple of announcements to make, because we are at the end of the day, as you know. And let's see, what do I... My phone tells me it's 5:47, so at, I think it's at 6:30 that the reception is taking place at the Four Seasons Centre Canadian Opera Company across the street from the main lobby. So we have quite a bit of time, actually, before we head over. And it's just a simple walk over is what I'm told, from the front entrance across the street. And you'll be able to see the Four Seasons Centre Canadian Opera for the reception starting at 6:30. So I wish you well. But before you leave, I would like to thank our presenters and offer them a token of our appreciation on behalf of CCMTA. Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ash.
With that, you're free to spend the next half an hour and a bit as you wish, and please do join us at the reception at 6:30.